I'm not quite sure I want to follow that.
Persevere.
I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle, in that my path to writing, I didn't have to walk over broken glass or anything, but it was almost actually insane how I got to where I am today, and there was a lot of serendipity involved. My first career was as a journalist. It was short-lived because there wasn't enough money in it, so I moved on. But when I was 24, I had a book published, nonfiction, but it was actually a Canadian Book of the Month Club main selection when it came out, and it did reasonably well. And then I went 40 years between books. But I was always reading, and I played around with things, but in 2009, I was running a business and not writing. And I was 64 years old, and the business was killing me, actually. It was very stressful, and I had a lot of money tied up in it, and I wasn't doing very well emotionally. And I was drinking to excess, as my wife told me every night. And she's at one point she said, your liver has to be enlarged, and you better see the doctor. So I went to see my family physician, and he informed me after an ultrasound that my liver was actually perfect, which disappointed my wife no end. But the bad news was I had an aneurysm. And so 2 weeks later, I'm in St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto for 8 hours of horrible surgery. And as I'm being taken back to my room by the orderly, he says to me, "You're in the old wing of the hospital, and if you see any nuns, don't talk to them." And I said, "Why wouldn't I talk to a nun?" And he said, "Because they're ghosts. And they only come to see you if they think you're going to die." So there I am, drugged to the eyeballs in the middle of the night in St. Michael's, and I'm hearing noises, and I'm seeing shadows, and hearing swishing skirts, and it scared me enormously. And I began to think about my life and all the things I hadn't done, and I realized that the thing I probably wanted to do more than anything was try to write a book. And I just decided if I get out of here alive, that's what I'm going to try to do. And my second day out of the hospital, I called my business partner in Thailand, and I sold him my piece of the business. And the third day out of hospital, I sat down and I started to write the first Ava Lee novel. And I started with exactly the name Ava Lee, which came to me from nowhere. I was still drugged, of course. I was still heavily medicated, but the name came to me from absolutely nowhere. And one sentence going through my head, and the sentence was, she didn't know where the call originated, but she was sure it was somewhere in Asia, and the caller was ignorant of the time difference or just too desperate to care. And that sentence actually survived the editing process. So I'm all of a sudden I start writing, and I don't plot, I don't pre-plan, I'm just writing, okay? And my wife comes. The phones aren't ringing because I've shut off all the phones, and she comes to and I work in the basement. I'm very almost stuck in the basement, and she says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm writing a book," and she says, "Oh," and she left, and then a week later she comes back, and she says, "You're still writing the book?" I said, "I'm still writing the book," and she says, "What's the book about?" I said, "It's about a Chinese-Canadian lesbian accountant." And she says, "Oh, for God's sake, can't you write about something you know?" And but undeterred, I kept writing, okay? And I'm halfway through this book, and I realize I have a plot for a second. So I start to build it in. So I finished the book. And that's all I wanted to do was finish it. And I had no notion of publishing. I had never thought of sending it to anyone. So, but I gave it to my wife, you know. And my wife is very critical, it's particularly where I'm concerned. But she's a good reader, though, and she is totally honest. And if the book had been crap, she would have said, "Ian, it's crap." And I would have put it away. I would never have shown it to another person. Instead, she said, "It's not bad," which for her was a huge compliment. So she said, "Perhaps you should think about getting it published." And I hadn't thought of it. So I said, okay. And then I started to try to contact publishers. And I knew nothing about what I was doing. And of course, I start with Random House. I work my way down. But you know, I quickly discovered they don't want to talk to you. They don't want emails. They don't want phone calls. They don't want nothing. They want nothing to do with you. Okay. And then I was told, you know what, you should get an agent, right? So then I cold called some. I was given some names, and I cold called. I was given 3 names actually. I cold called these agents, and the first 2 wouldn't talk to me. And the third, it was Westwood Creative, and the largest in the country. I think someone picked up the phone by mistake. and she was the non-fiction person at the agency. And she says, oh. So, you know, and I mentioned a name. I had a little connection I could make. So she said, "What's your book about?" I said, "It's about a Chinese-Canadian lesbian accountant who chases bad debts for a living." And she says, "Well, that is different." She said, "Perhaps our fiction agent here will send it in." So I sent in my manuscript. And a couple of days later, I get an email back from the agent saying, "Could you please double space it? And could you add page numbers and a title?" Because I had none of it. I sent it single space with no page numbers. So meanwhile, I had the idea for the second book, remember? So I'm now writing the second book because I just kept going, you know. And I'm more lightly medicated now, but I'm on a roll. And then all of a sudden, the agent calls me and says, "Could you come in for a meeting?" So I said, "Oh, sure." So I go. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my wife. Told no one. So I go in for this meeting, and I'm thinking it's going to be one of those meetings where they say, you know, it's a good start. Rework this, do that. Instead, they say to me, "Here's a contract. Could you sign it, please? We'd love to have you with us." So I signed this contract. And off I go, and now I'm working on the second book. And then they call me about a month later and say, "Oh, we just got an offer from Random House for 2 books, for both books." And I said, "Okay." And I'm in the basement in my pajamas. I mean, that's where I live, and so I have to get dressed again, you know, and so. But then they said to me, "But you know, House of Anansi wants to meet with us, and we think we should do that before we do the Random House deal." Now, if those of you who don't know House of Anansi, I'm actually very proud to be associated with them. It's Canada's largest independent publishing house. It's a great literary house. I mean, they were the ones who published Margaret Atwood and on and on and on. And the Griffin Poetry Prize is with Anansi, the Massey Lectures. And I could not fathom what the hell they wanted to do with my books. But we go to the meeting, and for those of you who don't know my character, she's a 5'3", 115 pound, mid-30s, Chinese Canadian. And we walk into this meeting at Anansi, and I'm looking at this Korean Canadian woman, 5'1", maybe 105 pounds. I don't know if she's a lesbian or not. But she's the senior editor at Anansi. And I'm thinking, this could be interesting, you know? And we have a conversation, and the next day, and during the course of the conversation, my agent mentioned that I was working on a 3rd book. Because what happened was, I was writing the 2nd, and I had an idea for 3rd and 4th books, right? Like everyone does. So, and I kept writing. I didn't stop. I just finish a book Tuesday afternoon, start the next one Tuesday night. That was what I was doing. So my agent, Ian's actually finished a third book. And he said, oh, and I said to the agent, actually I finished the fourth this morning. So Nancy bought all 4 books, made the offer. So I go back to the basement, and they've got these 4 books, and I don't hear from them for like months and months because they're doing their whatever they're doing, not much of anything actually, but then we get into the editing process, and that was a long, torturous thing, and but finally the book is first book is to be published. And but we don't have titles. We don't have any titles. I had no titles for any of the books. There were Ava Lee 1, 2, 3, and 4. It shows you how much imagination I lack. But I thought the publisher should be giving the titles to. I thought that's what they did. Like, I write them, you do the title. I thought that was the deal. But then they called me and said, we need titles, and we were like 2 months away from the first book coming out as advanced reading copies. And you need to come to a meeting. So I go to a meeting, and we're tossing around titles, and we're having tremendous difficulty coming up with title. And they wanted a family of titles, like Sue Grafton's A is for Alibi, that kind of thing, And the only title we had that seemed to work was The Disciple of Las Vegas, which is the title we had for the second book. So we decided to try to make that play on that. And so we came up with a title for the third book and the fourth book, but we still didn't have a title for the first book. And one of the guys in the meeting pulled out a book of Chinese horoscopes, was going through it. He says, oh, look, the water rat. He said, I like that water rat. And I said, well, it could be from Wan Chai, which is a Hong Kong neighborhood, so we have some alliteration. So that's how we came up with the title, The Water Rat of Wan Chai, which shows you how sophisticated the whole process is. But the problem was there was no mention of a water rat in the book, or Wan Chai. So I had to go back and insert all these little. So when you're reading the book and you see all these little mentions, they came rather late in the game. So we now we have a title, we have the book, and I'm excited. I mean, I'm very excited. And then off they go, and the London Book Fair is going on. And I'm sitting in the basement in my pajamas, and the phone rings, and there is my agent from London. And in the course of 3 or 4 days, they sold the rights to Germany, Spain, France, Italy, Turkey. We're now out in 8 or 9 languages. The books have been published in more than 30 countries. And I'm just sitting there saying, like, I had no clue. I mean, what was going on? I didn't have a clue. And I didn't even think I was lucky because I couldn't believe it. It was just this great piece of thing going on. And then, right after that, it was 2 or 3 weeks later, we get some competing bids for film rights coming in. And we cut a deal with a Canadian company. And about a week after we cut the deal and signed the paperwork, I get an email from Ridley Scott saying we'd like to acquire the rights to the Ava Lee books. And if I hadn't been in the basement, I would have jumped out of the window. So anyway, so that's how it sort of all started. Now, this is the 9th book in the series, and I have contracts through 14. My father, when he was alive, after he retired, used to book cruises everywhere. He took like 40 cruises, and he always believed if he'd booked a cruise, he wouldn't die. And I think if I have a book contract,
you can't die.
But I really want to follow up on what Eve said about persevering and sticking at it. I speak to a lot of probus clubs and things like that, And there are all these people who a lot of talent, but they're so self-defeating. They're too hard on themselves, and they're trying to be perfect in everything they do. And I've never been like that, I figure I set out to just write a book, and all I want to do is finish the damn thing. And I figured I can always go back and fix it, but I can't fix what I haven't finished. So that's what I always say, just finish it, and don't be too hard on yourselves, and you never know what the hell is going to happen. And I'm living proof of that. Thank you very much.